All right, so we've got these reports from Bloomberg.
Yeah.
And looks like things are getting pretty interesting with the whole Ukraine situation.
Yeah.
And how the U.S. is involved.
Like at the UN General Assembly.
Oh, yeah.
Both the U.S. and Russia voted against that resolution backed by Europe, the one condemning what Russia's been doing in Ukraine. That's a big deal, especially now, 3 years into this whole thing.
It is pretty strange, though, right? Like, on one hand, they're doing that. But then at the same time, the U.S. gets its own resolution through the UN Security Council.
Right.
Calling for everyone to just, stop fighting.
Yeah.
And that one, both Russia and the U.S. voted for it.
See, that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because that resolution, it doesn't actually say who's to blame for anything.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what the Trump administration is really up to here.
Right.
Is this really about making peace, or are they playing some kind of strategic game?
Well, and then you've got Trump himself, coming out and saying he's in serious negotiations with Putin to try and end this conflict. And he even hinted at meeting with Zelensky, too.
Oh, wow.
To work out some kind of deal about natural resources.
Interesting.
He's suggesting that could be the key to everything.
Huh.
Like, that's what will bring peace and even pay for U.S. aid.
That's where you really start to see this potential for a U.S.-Russia alliance, form it.
Yeah.
Putin's been doing his part, too, like reaching out to American investors, offering help with developing mineral resources in Russia. He even said he'd sell aluminum to the U.S. if those sanctions were lifted.
Wow. So he's offering economic incentives, but then he also comes out and supports Trump's idea to slash defense spending.
Right.
It's almost like he sees this as his chance to get in good with the U.S.
You might be right.
Yeah, well, Trump's off making deals with Russia, though.
Yeah.
The European allies are feeling kind of left out.
Makes sense. They're anxious about being sidelined in these peace talks, especially since they're so close to the region and they really want a peaceful solution.
Yeah. Macron even called his meeting with Trump a turning point, saying that Europe is ready to send peacekeepers to Ukraine once there's a lasting peace.
Okay.
But nobody really knows what role Europe will play in all this.
Right.
Or what security guarantees the U.S. will give to Ukraine.
It's fascinating to see how all this could completely change the balance of power in the world.
Yeah.
You can see it in how everyone's voting at the UN.
Right.
Like that European resolution in the General Assembly.
Yeah.
It did pass 93 votes in favor.
Okay.
But the U.S. and Russia voted against it, along with Belarus and North Korea.
Interesting. And then there's that other U.S. resolution, the one in the Security Council.
Yeah.
The one that doesn't blame anyone.
That one passed with Russia and China's support, which was not expected.
No, it wasn't. Especially since resolutions about this conflict always used to get blocked or vetoed by the permanent members of the council.
Right. So what we're seeing here is a realignment of the global players.
Yeah.
The U.S. might be getting closer to Russia while Europe's role is still unclear.
And that makes you wonder, what will this all mean for global stability?
Exactly.
Will it actually bring peace to Ukraine? Or will it just cause more problems with the old alliances and create new tensions?
It's a really complicated situation. Lots of moving parts.
It is. On the one hand, this cooperation between the U.S. and Russia, it could be a breakthrough.
It could.
But it could also make things worse with the European allies and create new problems on the world stage.
Absolutely. It's a high-stakes game, and nobody knows how it's going to end.
Definitely something we need to keep a close eye on.
For sure, the decisions being made in these negotiations and at the UN, they could have major consequences for how countries interact with each other in the future.
Okay, so let's try to sum up what we've learned.
Right.
There's been a major shift in U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah.
With Trump taking a more direct approach to negotiating with Russia, which has led to some surprising developments at the UN.
Definitely.
With both countries voting together on some resolutions.
We've also seen the European allies expressing their concerns about being left out of the peace talks.
Right.
And there are questions about what this potential U.S.-Russia alliance, what it means in the long term.
And don't forget about Putin's strategic moves.
Oh, yeah.
Using economic incentives to get closer to the U.S.
Right.
And taking advantage of the uncertainty between the U.S. and its European allies.
It's a complex situation.
It is.
And it's constantly changing.
Yeah.
We're only just beginning to understand what these shifting alliances could mean.
Right.
But one thing is for sure, the whole world is watching.
They are.
And the stakes are incredibly high. It's like watching the world shift right in front of us. All the old rules are changing.
Yeah, and it's not just about Ukraine either. This whole U.S.-Russia thing could affect everything.
Absolutely. Think about the Middle East, for example.
Okay.
What happens if the U.S. and Russia get closer? What does that mean for Syria, Yemen? could really shake things up over there.
Yeah.
Could embolden Iran, maybe even lead to new alliances forming.
And then there's the economic side of it, too. Putin offering to help American investors.
Right. It's not just about boosting Russia's economy. It's a way to get closer to U.S. businesses, maybe even drive a wedge between them and Europe.
Yeah, because Europe is still mostly sticking with those sanctions against Russia.
Yeah. Classic divide and conquer strategy. Appeal to U.S. economic interests.
Right.
Weaken that united front the West has had against Russia.
And it seems like it's working at least a little bit. Trump's so eager to work with Putin.
He is.
Plus, he's not really a fan of those traditional alliances anyway.
Yeah, seems like he prefers those one-on-one deals, transactional relationships, rather than those big multilateral agreements and long-standing partnerships.
But isn't that risky?
It is.
Like, what if this alienates the European allies?
It could backfire.
Yeah.
Lead to a more fragmented world, less stable one. And don't forget about China. They could take advantage of a divided West for sure.
Yeah.
It's like everyone's playing a high-stakes poker game.
Right, trying to outsmart each other and come out on top.
Exactly, but the stakes are so high.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about money here.
Right.
We're talking about the possibility of war, the erosion of international norms, the whole global power balance shifting.
And what about the smaller countries, the ones caught in the middle of all this?
Right, like Ukraine, obviously.
Yeah.
But there are others too, especially in Eastern Europe, the ones who rely on the U.S. for security.
Right. They must be watching all this and feeling very uncertain.
Anxious for sure. So what's going to happen next?
Yeah. Is this U.S.-Russia thing just a temporary blip?
Right. Or is this a whole new world order?
Yeah.
It's too early to tell.
Okay.
There are so many factors at play, domestic politics in both countries, what happens in Ukraine, the bigger geopolitical picture.
Right. But one thing's for sure. Things are changing.
They are.
And the world is entering a very uncertain and risky time.
It's a time for caution, strategic thinking, really understanding what's happening.
And maybe a little skepticism, too.
A healthy dose, for sure.
Yeah.
We need to really think critically about the information we're getting.
Right.
Challenge our assumptions. Think about the consequences of these shifting alliances.
Because in the end, what's at stake is peace and stability for everyone.
Exactly. The decisions made in the next few months and years will affect everyone.
It will.
And we need to be informed and ready to engage with this complex and evolving world.
So we've talked about the Middle East and the concerns of the European allies.
Yeah.
But what about the economic impact of all this? What happens to global trade, energy markets, the whole financial system?
Those are big questions.
And
And the answers are complicated.
Sure.
On the one hand, if the U.S. and Russia reduce tensions, it could lead to more economic cooperation, which would be good for both countries, and could have a positive ripple effect on the whole global economy.
Like maybe lifting those sanctions on Russia.
Right. That would open up new markets for U.S. businesses.
Yeah.
Create opportunities for them to work together on things like energy and technology.
Makes sense, but what about the downsides?
Well, closer ties with Russia could hurt U.S. economic relationships with other countries.
Right, especially Europe.
Exactly. And it could make global trade less predictable, more volatile.
And then there's the energy question.
Oh, right. Russia's a huge energy producer.
Yeah. Any change in U.S. policy towards Russia could have a big impact on global energy markets.
Imagine the U.S. eases sanctions on Russian energy exports.
Which would be good for people who use energy.
Right. But it could also hurt efforts to switch to cleaner energy sources.
And it could make Europe more reliant on Russia for energy.
Yeah, which would give Putin more power in his dealings with the West.
So the economic implications are complicated.
They are. It's not a simple win or lose situation.
Right. There are both pros and cons to consider.
Exactly. And how it all plays out depends on a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like what policies the Trump administration actually pursues.
Right.
And how other countries react.
Okay, so where does China fit into all of this?
China is the big question mark.
Yeah.
They're watching all this very carefully,
Right.
trying to figure out how to take advantage of the situation.
So a more divided West is good for China.
It could be.
Yeah.
It gives them more room to expand their influence.
Right, especially in places like Africa and Southeast Asia.
Exactly. But they might also see a closer U.S.-Russia partnership as a threat. It could lead to more conflict between the three powers.
So it's like a three-way chess match?
It is each side trying to predict the other's moves and come out ahead.
And we don't know who's going to win.
We don't. It all depends on so many things.
Yeah.
The political situations in each country.
Right.
The global economy.
Yeah.
The decisions made by the leaders in Washington Moscow and Beijing.
But one thing's for sure.
Yeah.
The old world order is changing.
It is. Power is shifting away from the West.
And this new reality has both opportunities and risks.
It does. On the one hand, a more multipolar world could be more balanced and stable.
Right. Because no one country has all the power.
Exactly. And it could give new voices a chance to be heard on the world stage.
But on the other hand,
Yeah.
it could lead to more competition and conflict.
It could, as different countries fight for power and resources.
And wouldn't it be harder to tackle global problems?
It would, like climate change, pandemics, nuclear proliferation.
Right, because those require everyone to work together.
Exactly. So as we move into this new world, we need to understand what's at stake.
Right.
And be ready to deal with the complexity of it all.
We've talked about geopolitics, economics, and the political fallout of these shifting alliances.
We have.
But what about the human cost of all this? What's happening to ordinary people?
It's easy to get caught up in the big picture.
It is.
But we can't forget about the real world consequences. Like in Ukraine, thousands of people have already died.
Yeah.
Millions have been displaced.
It's terrible.
It is. Communities are being torn apart. People are losing their homes, their livelihoods.
Yeah.
The trauma will last for generations.
And if the conflict spreads, it could get even worse.
It get even more suffering.
We can't forget that behind all the politics and power struggles, there are real people whose lives are being shattered.
And it's not just those directly affected by conflict, the refugee crisis. It's putting huge pressure on countries all over the world.
It is.
Resources are strained.
Yeah.
And people's compassion is being tested.
The rise of populism and nationalism, both in the U.S. and Europe.
It's partly a reaction to all this.
Right. People are scared and uncertain about the future.
They are.
And they're looking for easy answers.
And strong leaders who promise to protect them.
But those simple solutions often have a dark side.
They do.
They can erode democracy, undermine human rights, fuel intolerance and division.
Exactly. So as we try to make sense of this new world order, we need to do it with empathy, compassion, and a commitment to human dignity.
Because ultimately, foreign policy should be about creating a world where everyone can live in peace.
And security and freedom.
Okay, so we've covered a lot today.
We have.
Geopolitics, economics, politics, the human impact of it all.
It's been a complex and challenging conversation.
It has, but an important one.
Definitely. It's clear that the world is changing. We're in a time of uncertainty and transition.
The old rules are gone.
They are, and the future is unclear.
But we can't just sit back and watch.
We can't.
We have to engage with these issues.
Yes.
Think critically, demand better from our leaders.
We need them to act with wisdom, courage, and compassion.
Because the stakes are too high to ignore.
They are.
And as we navigate this new world, we should remember what Nelson Mandela said.
What's that?
It always seems impossible until it's done.
Powerful words.
They are.
Let's be inspired by them and work towards a world where peace, justice, and equality are a reality.
Subscribe to our podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear, new episodes every day.